I had served as a junior archivist inside the Galactic Council Nexus for only 3 years, yet I already believed I understood how the galaxy worked. The Council governed hundreds of civilizations, balancing peace through treaties, diplomacy, and overwhelming military strength. Ancient empires filled the highest seats, while younger species, including humanity, occupied the outer circles, rarely drawing attention. That illusion of stability shattered during an emergency session unlike any before. Security forces lined the chamber, military commanders replaced diplomats, and the speaker abandoned centuries of tradition. Galactic intelligence revealed a chilling pattern. Diplomatic convoys had been ambushed across dozens of sectors, and heirs to powerful dynasties had disappeared without a trace. These were not random attacks. They were carefully planned strikes meant to remove the next generation of rulers. As silence spread through the chamber, I realized someone was not trying to conquer the galaxy. They were preparing to make it destroy itself from within. I remained at my archive station as Director Varric expanded the investigation. New images replaced the missing convoys, showing family trees of the oldest dynasties in the galaxy. Red symbols marked every vanished heir. The disappearances had occurred over 16 years, always during routine travel, always without witnesses, and always leaving behind wreckage that suggested pirate attacks. That explanation had satisfied investigators for far too long. It satisfied no one now. The pattern is undeniable, Varric said. Someone has been removing future rulers while allowing current governments to survive. When the present generation dies, entire civilizations will face succession crises. The chamber erupted with anxious voices. Admirals demanded fleet mobilizations. Diplomats accused rival empires. Several monarchs insisted their borders be sealed immediately. I watched centuries of political restraint disappear within minutes. Fear was proving more dangerous than any weapon. Then Varric raised a final report. 2 names remain unaccounted for. The chamber fell silent again. He displayed the portraits of 2 young sisters belonging to one of the galaxy's oldest royal houses, heirs whose disappearance had been recorded nearly 10 years earlier. Unlike the others, they had never been declared dead. Their escort vessel had vanished beyond a remote trade route, leaving no distress signal, no survivors, and no confirmed wreckage. If our enemy discovers these heirs before we do, Varric continued, they will possess legitimate claimants to an imperial throne. With such leverage they could ignite a civil war capable of drawing half the galaxy into open conflict. I felt every delegate understand the implication at the same moment. This conspiracy had never been about murder alone. It was about controlling the future through the children who would inherit it. Whoever orchestrated these disappearances had planned with extraordinary patience, moving pieces across decades instead of years. For the first time since joining the council, I looked around the chamber and saw uncertainty on every ancient face. The galaxy had always believed experience guaranteed security. Today, experience had failed us all. I expected the council to authorize another massive military search. Instead, the discussion dissolved into arguments over jurisdiction, borders, and political consequences. Every empire wanted the missing heirs found, but none trusted another civilization to lead the investigation. The longer the debate continued, the clearer it became that fear had replaced reason. Director Varric requested permission to review archived navigation records from the year the royal sisters disappeared. Thousands of routes appeared above the chamber, each traced in pale blue across the galaxy. Most ended in dead ends, destroyed stations, or abandoned colonies. Then one insignificant entry caught his attention. The last verified civilian sighting occurred near the Ashridge colony. Several delegates frowned. Ashridge? One ambassador repeated. Varric enlarged the record. It was nothing more than a small agricultural settlement established by humanity on the edge of Coalition space. Fewer than 30,000 colonists lived there, producing food and machinery for neighboring systems. It possessed no military importance, no strategic resources, and no political influence. The records indicate an unidentified escape pod entered the colony's atmosphere approximately 10 years ago, Varric explained. The investigation at the time found nothing of significance. A senior admiral dismissed the report with a wave of his hand. A farming colony? Impossible. If royal heirs had survived, they would have contacted their government immediately. Several others nodded. Another counselor laughed quietly. Humans had barely joined the coalition then. Their settlements were primitive compared to ours. Even if the children landed there, what could inexperienced colonists possibly have done? The discussion shifted away almost as quickly as it had begun. Attention returned to fleet deployments and intelligence operations. Ashridge became another forgotten footnote buried beneath larger concerns. From my archive station, I glanced toward the human delegation for the first time that day. Unlike the others, they had not spoken. Their ambassador simply studied the old report with calm, thoughtful eyes, as though one forgotten colony mattered far more than the greatest fleets gathered inside the council chamber. I could not explain why, but for the first time that day, I found myself wondering whether the smallest detail in the archives might prove to be the most important one. I expected the speaker to adjourn the session. The council had reached the familiar stage where endless debate replaced meaningful action. Fleets were being proposed, borders were being reinforced, and every civilization insisted that a larger military response would solve a problem that had already evaded them for more than a decade. Then the human ambassador slowly rose from her seat. For several seconds, no one noticed. Humanity occupied one of the outer circles reserved for the coalition's youngest members, and their representatives rarely interrupted discussions led by the ancient powers. The quiet woman waited patiently until the chamber settled. Only then did she step onto the central platform. "My name is Ambassador Elena Park," she said calmly. "With the speaker's permission, humanity would like to offer a different perspective." Several delegates exchanged amused glances, but the speaker nodded. "You may proceed." Elena looked across the chamber without the slightest trace of nervousness. "For the past 6 hours," she began, "I have heard proposals involving fleets, intelligence networks, surveillance satellites, and military occupations." She paused just long enough for every eye to settle upon her. All of them assumed that the missing heirs survived because of extraordinary circumstances. Silence spread through the chamber. What if the opposite is true? A few delegates frowned. What if they survived because an ordinary person chose to help? The ambassador folded her hands behind her back. "Not every hero wears a uniform." Her voice remained steady. "Sometimes the future of the galaxy depends on the person who simply refuses to ignore someone in need." No one interrupted. "If the archived report places the escape pod near Ashridge colony, then do not begin by searching the stars again." She looked directly toward Director Varric. "Find the people who lived there. Find whoever offered shelter. Find whoever never realized they had changed history." The chamber remained completely silent. The proposal required no armadas, no invasions, no declarations of war, only the willingness to ask a simple question that no one had considered asking for 10 years. As I recorded every word into the council archives, I noticed something unexpected. For the first time since the emergency session had begun, the ancient civilizations had stopped arguing. They were thinking. I expected the chamber to applaud the ambassador's reasoning. Instead, several delegates exchanged amused glances before quiet laughter spread through the upper tiers. It began as polite disbelief, but within moments even senior representatives were smiling. To them, the proposal sounded impossibly simple, almost childish, compared to the vast military operations already under discussion. Marshal Corbin of the Terex Dominion rose from his seat, the medals across his armored uniform gleaming beneath the chamber lights. He commanded one of the largest fleets in known space, and his opinion carried enormous weight among the elder civilizations. "So," he said with a grin, "after 10 years of failure, humanity suggests that our greatest intelligence agencies should question farmers?" A ripple of laughter answered him. Corbin slowly turned toward Ambassador Park. "You believe the fate of an empire depends not on admirals, investigators, or soldiers, but on some anonymous civilian living on an agricultural colony? She remained perfectly calm. I believe evidence matters more than assumptions. The Marshal chuckled. If a simple farmer managed to save the heirs of one of the oldest empires, then perhaps we no longer need fleets. More laughter echoed through the chamber. Perhaps, another delegate added, we should replace every admiral with gardeners and mechanics. Even members who had remained silent until then allowed themselves faint smiles. The idea seemed absurd. History was shaped by powerful rulers, mighty warships, and victorious armies, not by ordinary people whose names never appeared in official records. I looked toward Ambassador Park, expecting irritation or embarrassment. Instead, she simply waited. She neither defended herself nor argued with the mockery. She watched the chamber with patient eyes, as though she had anticipated every word long before entering the council hall. Something about her composure unsettled me. The laughter gradually faded, leaving only an uncomfortable silence behind. The ambassador had offered no dramatic speech, no emotional appeal, and no attempt to prove the others wrong. She had merely planted an idea. As I completed my record of the session, I found myself wondering whether history truly belonged to emperors and generals, or whether it sometimes began with a stranger opening a door for someone in need. I had never heard of Ashridge until the council archives sent me there. Compared to the glittering capitals of the great civilizations, the colony seemed almost invisible. It rested beneath broad blue skies, surrounded by endless fields, quiet workshops, and modest homes built by people who valued usefulness over appearance. Nothing about the settlement suggested that it had once become the refuge of two missing royal heirs. The investigation spread across the colony with surprising restraint. Instead of soldiers, small teams of investigators walked from house to house, politely asking the same question. Do you remember anything unusual from 10 years ago? Most residents shook their heads. Some recalled a damaged escape pod falling beyond the northern hills. Others remembered weeks of heavy rain that had washed away nearly every trace of the crash. No answer seemed important, until one elderly shopkeeper paused. I remember Ethan Carter, she said. He's the mechanic outside the eastern fields. Quiet fellow, keeps mostly to himself. 10 years ago he disappeared from work for nearly a week. Said he was helping a pair of travelers who gotten themselves into trouble. The investigators immediately requested his address. At that very moment, Ethan Carter was lying beneath an old agricultural harvester, tightening a worn hydraulic fitting while soft music played from a dusty radio in the corner of his workshop. Grease covered his hands, and several repair orders waited on a nearby bench. His life followed the same peaceful rhythm it always had. Machines broke, he repaired them. Neighbors waved as they passed. Nothing ever seemed urgent. He had no idea that his name had just been spoken inside the greatest political chamber in the galaxy. He also had no idea that dozens of government ships were already descending toward Ashridge. 10 years earlier, he had found two frightened alien girls wandering through the forest, exhausted, hungry, and terrified. He had asked no questions about crowns, empires, or politics. He had simply brought them home, offered warm food, clean clothes, and a safe place to sleep. To Ethan, it had never been history. It had simply been the right thing to do. By sunset, the quiet life he had built was about to end forever. VidIQ. I first noticed the shadows crossing the workshop floor before I heard the engines. Curious, I stepped outside and froze. Above Ashridge hovered dozens of enormous starships, their polished hulls reflecting the afternoon sun. Smaller escorts descended in perfect formation toward the colony, while every communicator around me erupted with emergency broadcasts ordering civilians to remain calm. My neighbors stared skyward in stunned silence. None of us had ever seen a royal fleet. For a long moment I simply stood there, wiping grease from my hands with an old cloth. Then memory returned with startling clarity. The crystal medallion. I hurried back into the workshop and opened a weathered metal toolbox hidden beneath my workbench. Wrapped inside an oil-stained rag rested the small crystal pendant one of the girls had pressed into my hand before leaving. She had insisted I keep it, saying only that one day someone might come asking questions. I had smiled, thanked her, and stored it away, never imagining it could matter. As I lifted the medallion into the light, a quiet chime echoed through the room. A tiny symbol flickered within the crystal, responding to the presence of ships overhead. My eyes drifted toward an even older machine resting in the corner. The workshop security recorder. Most people replaced those systems years ago, but I had never bothered. The recorder still captured everything that happened inside the garage, storing files on durable crystal drives built to survive decades. A strange feeling settled over me. I connected the recorder to my workshop terminal and searched the archives. Thousands of ordinary repair logs appeared until I reached the week 2 frightened girls had stayed under my roof. The recordings were still there. Every conversation, every frightened glance, every unfamiliar face that had followed them to my door. I pressed play. The grainy image filled the screen. Without realizing it, I had preserved a witness account that no intelligence agency, no royal investigator, and no council archive had managed to recover in 10 long years. Outside, the first shuttle touched down. Someone had finally come looking for the truth. I stepped out of my workshop just as the shuttle's landing ramp lowered with quiet precision. Soldiers in deep blue ceremonial armor emerged first, forming a protective corridor across the dusty ground. Their discipline alone told me they were no ordinary guards. Behind them came 2 young women, both dressed in elegant white uniforms trimmed with silver. They paused at the bottom of the ramp and looked directly at me. For several long seconds, none of us spoke. Then the taller of the 2 smiled. "It really is you," she whispered. The voice struck me like a forgotten melody. Suddenly I no longer saw confident young women surrounded by royal guards. I saw 2 frightened girls wrapped in oversized blankets, sitting at my kitchen table with steaming bowls of soup clutched tightly in trembling hands. "You," they groaned, I managed to say. The younger woman laughed softly, her eyes already shining with tears. "So have you, Ethan." Before I could react, both sisters crossed the distance between us and embraced me without hesitation. Around us, admirals, investigators, and soldiers stood frozen in disbelief. None of them had expected the long-lost heirs of one of the galaxy's oldest empires to greet an unknown human mechanic-like family. When they stepped back, the elder sister composed herself. "My name is Lyra Valerian," she said formally. "This is my sister, Nia. We are the rightful heirs to the Valerian throne." "I figured you were important," I admitted with an awkward smile. "Didn't think you were that important." Nia laughed exactly as she had 10 years earlier. "You never asked." "I didn't think it mattered." Lyra's expression softened. "That is precisely why we survived." An elderly royal advisor approached carrying a sealed document. "Your Highnesses," he said respectfully, "the Council has convened an emergency session. Director Varric requests your immediate presence." Lyra nodded before turning back toward me. "We cannot reveal the truth without you." She glanced toward the workshop. "The recording you preserved may be the only surviving evidence of what truly happened." I looked at the crystal drive still resting in my hand. A forgotten security camera, an ordinary workshop, 10 years of dust, and somehow, everything the galaxy needed had been waiting in my garage all along. I had stood in the council chamber countless times as an observer, but never had I felt the weight of history pressing upon every breath. The galleries were filled beyond capacity. Representatives from every major civilization had returned, eager to witness the testimony of the 2 long-lost heirs. Yet all eyes eventually settled not on Princess Lyra or Princess Nia, but on the quiet mechanic standing beside them. Ethan Carter looked deeply uncomfortable beneath the towering ceiling of the council nexus. He wore a freshly pressed human suit that could not hide the calluses on his hands. He did not carry himself like a hero or a witness whose words might reshape the galaxy. To him, this was simply another problem that needed fixing. Director Varric invited him to the center platform. "Ethan Carter," he said, "do you possess evidence concerning the disappearance of the royal heirs?" "I think I do," Ethan replied honestly. "I just never knew it mattered." He placed the old crystal drive onto the projection console. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the recording came to life. The grainy image revealed Ethan's workshop exactly as it had appeared 10 years earlier. Two frightened young girls sat beside a workbench, wrapped in blankets while Ethan prepared food. Moments later, the workshop door burst open. Several armored figures entered, speaking in hushed voices. Their faces were clear enough for the council archives to identify them instantly. A wave of disbelief swept through the chamber. "They read council security," someone whispered. Director Varric's expression hardened as names appeared beside each face. Everyone belonged to trusted officials who had overseen investigations into the missing heirs. Instead of searching for the children, they had been hunting them. The recording continued. One officer calmly explained that the attack on the diplomatic convoy had been arranged from within the council itself. Foreign enemies had merely served as convenient scapegoats while influential conspirators eliminated future rulers to seize power. Panic erupted. Several delegates suddenly reached for concealed weapons. The conspirators had realized their secret was exposed. They lunged toward the central platform, hoping to silence Ethan before the recording could finish. They were too late. Coalition security forces and Lyra's loyal guards intercepted them within seconds. The chamber became a blur of shouted commands and flashing restraint fields. When the struggle ended, the traitors lay in custody. For the first time in 10 years, the truth belonged to the galaxy instead of those who had hidden it. I had witnessed victories celebrated with magnificent parades, peace treaties signed beneath the flags of countless civilizations, and emperors crowned before cheering worlds. None of those moments compared to the silence that followed the final seconds of Ethan Carter's recording. No one applauded. No one spoke. The chamber remained utterly still as every delegate stared at the frozen image projected above the platform. It did not show a great battle, a heroic sacrifice, or a military triumph. It showed an ordinary mechanic placing 2 bowls of hot soup before 2 frightened children who had nowhere else to go. That single scene changed everything. For years, the council had searched for brilliant spies, legendary commanders, and hidden fleets. They had assumed only extraordinary people could preserve the future of an empire. Instead, the galaxy discovered that its greatest victory had begun inside a modest workshop on a forgotten farming colony. I looked toward Lyra and Nia. Neither princess was watching the recording anymore. Both were looking at Ethan. There was no doubt in their eyes. They remembered every detail of those difficult days: the warm meal, the clean blankets, the quiet reassurance that they would be safe. Ethan had never asked their names, demanded payment, or expected gratitude. He had simply seen 2 hungry children and refused to leave them alone. Director Varric slowly broke the silence. "For 10 years," he said, "the council searched for heroes in the wrong places." His words echoed through the chamber. "We searched among admirals, intelligence agencies, and royal courts." He turned toward Ethan. "When the person who protected the future of an empire was a mechanic who believed kindness required no permission." The realization spread across the chamber like dawn breaking over a dark horizon. One warm meal had preserved the rightful heirs. One unlocked door had denied the conspirators their final victory. One ordinary act of compassion had prevented a civil war that could have consumed half the galaxy. As I entered the final record of the emergency session into the archives, I understood that history would remember this day for many reasons. Not because traitors had been exposed, not because an empire had been saved, but because the galaxy had finally learned who humanity truly was. I remained in the council chamber long after the conspirators had been escorted away. The noise that had once filled the hall had vanished, replaced by thoughtful conversations unlike any I had ever recorded. For centuries, the elder civilizations had measured greatness by the size of an empire, the strength of its fleets, and the reach of its influence. Now those same civilizations were forced to confront a truth that none of them had expected. It was not humanity's weapons that had changed the galaxy. It was humanity's character. One after another, representatives rose from their seats, not to argue, but to admit their mistakes. The Keelan ambassador lowered his head before the assembly. "We judged your people too quickly," he said. "We believed your civilization was young and therefore insignificant. We were wrong." Others followed. Military commanders who had laughed at Ambassador Park's proposal now acknowledged that no fleet could have accomplished what one compassionate citizen had done. Scholars admitted that countless historical models had overlooked the importance of simple human decency. Even rulers from the oldest dynasties confessed that they had forgotten the value of ordinary people while chasing extraordinary solutions. Ambassador Park accepted every apology with quiet dignity. "Humanity sought neither recognition nor praise," she replied. "We simply hope this reminds us all that kindness is never a weakness." Those words echoed throughout the chamber. As I watched Ethan Carter standing beside Lyra and Nia, I noticed he seemed embarrassed by the attention. He had not rescued princesses because they were heirs to an empire. He had rescued two frightened children because they were hungry and alone. Even after learning the truth, he behaved exactly as he always had. That, more than anything else, impressed the council. For the first time since Earth had joined the coalition, humanity earned genuine respect, not through military strength or technological achievement, but through integrity, compassion, and the quiet belief that helping a stranger required no reward. As I finalized the official record, I realized the galaxy had begun measuring civilizations by an entirely different standard. And humanity, once dismissed as insignificant, had become the example everyone else wished they had followed. I expected the emergency session to end with demands for rewards. History had taught me that every great service to the council was followed by negotiations, political favors, or territorial claims. Humanity had exposed a conspiracy that threatened the entire galaxy, restored the rightful heirs to one of its oldest empires, and prevented a war that could have lasted generations. If any civilization had earned the right to ask for influence, it was Earth. Instead, Ambassador Park requested the floor one final time. She stepped onto the platform with the same calm expression she had worn throughout the crisis. On behalf of Earth, she began, "I wish to thank the Council for its trust." Several delegates leaned forward, expecting the inevitable list of demands. It never came. Humanity does not seek additional voting rights. A quiet murmur spread across the chamber. "We do not request new territory." More surprised glances followed. "We ask for no financial compensation, military privileges, or political concessions." Even the oldest representatives seemed unable to hide their astonishment. Ambassador Park allowed the silence to settle before continuing. "Instead, Earth proposes a coalition-wide humanitarian initiative dedicated to protecting orphaned, displaced, and abandoned children from every civilization." The holographic display changed. Images of shelters, medical centers, schools, and rescue transports appeared above the chamber. "The conspirators succeeded because frightened children were left alone," she said softly. "Let us ensure that never happens again." The proposal was unlike anything I had ever entered into the council archives. It spoke not of borders or weapons, but of homes, families, education, and hope. Speaker Thalen turned toward Ethan Carter. "Mr. Carter," he asked, "would you care to address the council?" Ethan looked uncomfortable as hundreds of eyes settled upon him. He cleared his throat before speaking. "I don't really know much about politics." Gentle laughter warmed the chamber. "I only know that if we can save even one child." He paused, searching for the right words. "Then everything we do is worthwhile." No applause followed immediately. The delegates simply rose to their feet, one by one, honoring not a hero seeking glory, but an ordinary man whose kindness had reminded the entire galaxy what true civilization looked like. I returned to the Council Nexus 3 standard years after the conspiracy had been uncovered. The station looked much the same, yet the galaxy beyond it had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The emergency resolutions passed that day had become living institutions rather than forgotten promises. Across dozens of star systems, humanitarian centers known as Carter Haven welcomed children displaced by war, piracy, natural disasters, and political unrest. Every center carried the same symbol engraved above its entrance, a simple crystal medallion modeled after the one Nia had left in Ethan's workshop. It had become a reminder that compassion often began with the smallest gesture. As the Council's archivist, I traveled to several of these sanctuaries to preserve their history. Everywhere I went, I witnessed the same quiet miracle. Children from civilizations that had once distrusted one another now learned together, played together, and grew up believing that differences in language, appearance, or biology mattered far less than kindness. The initiative had spread far beyond anything Ambassador Park originally proposed. Doctors volunteered across borders without hesitation. Engineers rebuilt schools before military outposts. Former soldiers became guardians for those who had lost their families. The galaxy had not become perfect, but it had become more compassionate. Ethan Carter never sought fame despite becoming the inspiration for it all. He continued repairing machines on Ashridge whenever he wished, refusing every offer of wealth or political office. Yet his workshop was never empty for long. Visitors from distant worlds arrived simply to shake his hand or thank him for reminding them what it meant to care for another person. Lyra and Nia visited him whenever royal duties allowed. I watched them laughing around the same kitchen table where frightened children had once shared their first safe meal in days. They no longer addressed him as Mr. Carter. They called him family. Military academies added his story to their leadership courses. Diplomatic schools required every student to study the Ashridge incident before receiving their credentials. Future rulers learned that compassion could succeed where fleets and intelligence agencies had failed. As I completed the final archive of Carter Haven's founding, I understood that Ethan had never changed the galaxy by trying to become extraordinary. He had changed it by refusing to stop being ordinary. I stood among the delegates during the dedication of the first Carter Haven on the Council Nexus, watching representatives from every civilization gather in complete silence. There were no military parades, no displays of power, and no victorious fleets filling the stars beyond the station. It seemed fitting. This day had never belonged to armies. The oldest representative of the council slowly approached the podium. His voice was quiet, worn by centuries, yet every word carried through the vast chamber. For thousands of years, he began, we measured civilizations by the size of their fleets, the strength of their weapons, and the reach of their empires. His gaze settled on Ethan Carter, who stood near Lyra and Nia looking as uncomfortable with the attention as he had on the day he first entered this chamber. Humanity taught us a greater lesson. The greatest civilizations are not remembered for the wars they win, but for the lives they choose to save, even when no one is watching. No applause followed. None was needed. As I closed the final page of the council archives, I understood that history would remember neither the conspirators nor the fleets that once filled this chamber. It would remember a mechanic who opened his door to two frightened children without asking their names, their titles, or what he might gain in return. Empires would rise. Empires would fall. But one simple act of kindness had outlived them all. And from that day forward, every civilization in the galaxy finally understood the true measure of greatness.